Hello, my name is Allison Baker. I'm a staff attorney at the Legal Aid Society's Immigration Law Unit. I'm here today to talk a little bit about the Haitian TPS re-registration. I want to thank you all for listening to this webinar and also for agreeing to help with the upcoming Haitian TPS re-registration events. So just to start, the re-registration period is pretty small window. So it's from January 18th to March 19th. So it's about a 60-day window period for helping the Haitian community re-register for TPS. So I'm going to go through some basic screening for eligibility. Also, just keeping in mind the whole time that Legal Aid Society staff will be present. So if there's any questions when it comes to screening or at any point in the process, we'll always be there to assist at any point. So for very basic eligibility, first and foremost, you have to be a Haitian national, right? You have to have entered the U.S. prior to the January 12th, 2011 redesignation for TPS. You have to have been approved for TPS previously. So under the current re-registration period, there are no new registrations at this point. There are very narrow exceptions for certain individuals who can late file an initial TPS application, but those are very limited, and at this late stage in the game when it comes to TPS for Haiti, I don't anticipate that we'll have very many, if any, late filers. However, if that does come up, of course, speak to a staff of Legal Aid Society and we can delve more into that. The scope of who can file a late initial registration is beyond the scope of this presentation, but we'll, of course, be able to help you out with that if it comes up during the course of an event. If approved for TPS, the TPS status will be extended through July 22nd, 2019, and that will be essentially the end of TPS for Haitians at that point. So TPS is terminating after July 22nd, 2019. Therefore, this, as far as we know at this point, this is going to be the last re-registration period. This will be mainly for people who have been re-registering all of these years, so they're somewhat familiar with the process of how to do it and what they need, but of course need help with the actual application process. Because TPS is terminating after this last registration in July of 2019, it's even more critical than ever that applicants be screened for other forms of immigration relief. We have a really helpful screening tool that we'll be using at the events that will kind of walk you through the different forms of relief, and you'll be able to use that as a guide. But just to mention a few, some TPS registrants might be eligible for a family adjustment. Perhaps they're now married to a U.S. citizen spouse, or they have a U.S. citizen child who has since turned 21. They could have entered on a visa, or maybe they entered without a visa but have somehow cured that prior unlawful entry by traveling on advance parole. Keeping in mind that if there was ever any fraud in the process, any previous fraud with immigration that was waived during the TPS process, should they now be able to adjust through a family member, they would have to reapply for any sort of fraud waiver. So, for example, if they had entered previously on a fraudulent passport and they waive that for the purpose of their TPS registration, that waiver wouldn't apply to a family adjustment. They would have to reapply for another fraud waiver. Some other types of possible relief that could come up that possibly could help Haitians who are applying for registration, something called the U visa, which is for victims of mainly violent crimes, the T visa, which is a trafficking visa for victims of human trafficking. There's something called the VAWA self-petition, that's the Violence Against Women Act self-petition, which for the most part is for spouses and children of abusive U.S. citizens and permanent residents, and a couple of others. There's something called HRIFA, and we have a very helpful fact sheet on HRIFA that we'll have with us there at the events, which is the Haitian family reunification process. And we'll be able to walk applicants through that screening tool and see if there's any possibilities there. And then maybe some applicants might be eligible for asylum, withholding, or relief under CAT, the Convention Against Torture. So, again, we don't expect you to be experts on any of these areas of relief. However, we want to just point out that it's very important that we use the screening tool and that we talk to each applicant about any other possibilities with immigration, especially now because TPS is ending. Okay. So while you're doing the screening, hopefully many of the applicants will be bringing their prior approval notices because, again, they've been registering for TPS several times over the years. They should also have their most recent work permit, which is called the Employment Authorization Document, or EAD. And if they've had any arrests or encounters with law enforcement since their last application, they should have information regarding that arrest. Hopefully they would have a certificate of disposition from the criminal court, and we would be able to review that because it's very important that they're still remain eligible for TPS, and there are certain convictions that could make an applicant ineligible. And so if they have an arrest since their last application, it's really important that we review that before helping them reapply. These are just examples of a couple of employment authorization documents. The format of them have changed over the years. On top is the more recent one. On the bottom is a older version. But there's information on here that's useful for the application process. So on the various forms that we're going to look at in a few minutes, they ask for what's called the A number. Sometimes it is actually listed as the A number, like on the bottom version it says INS-A number, so it's right there. On the more recent version on top, it's called the USCIS number, but just to point out that that's the A number. That for whatever reason, they just call it USCIS number on the more recent version of the employment authorization document. So you're going to enter that A number on all the forms that we're going to look at in a few minutes. Mainly, it's the I-821, which is the main TPS application, as well as the I-765, which is the employment authorization work permit application. And then we'll talk a little bit later about possible fee waivers. Applicants also have to submit passport photos as part of their application packet, and we should assist them by writing their name and their A number on the back of the photos. Should they get separated from the packet, they'd be able to figure out who they belong to. So for application assistance, the main applications that must be submitted is the I-821, which is the TPS application itself, the I-765, which is the employment authorization document or work permit application. It's really important to point out that the I-765 must be included in the packet, even if the applicant does not want a work permit. Now, most people do want a work permit, so it doesn't come up that often. However, there might be individuals that are no longer working, or maybe small children, or whatever the case, and they don't want the work permit. It does cost more to get the work permit, so that's also a reason why some people don't apply for it. But regardless of whether they want to apply for it or not, it must be included in the packet, the form itself, and we'll talk about how to fill it out in a little while. The G1145 is an electronic notification. It's if you want to get notified electronically about updates on your case. It's optional, so it's not required in any way. The I-912 is a fee waiver request, so for those who are requesting fee waivers, that form will be used. And the important thing is that every family member gets their own set of forms, so even though children's names might be included on a parent's form, they would need their own re-registration packet. It's really important, since we'll be handwriting these applications, that you try your best to write as clearly as possible using black pens, and just to make sure it's clear, especially with the names. If the name is not clear on the application, it could result in a work permit coming with a wrong name or the name spelled incorrectly, which is a lengthy and expensive process sometimes to get corrected. So it's really important to write as neatly as possible. Also, to not cross out, because cross-outs can cause problems when the forms are scanned in. Usually we'll have duplicates of each page of the form available, so if you make an error on one page, you can just kind of swap out that page and correct it. Again, just to point out, it's important to write clearly. Misspelled names can be a problem for the applicant down the road. If you have an issue with that, just come speak to one of us. So now to look at the forms themselves. We're going to start with the I-821, which is the application for TPS. For pretty much everyone at these events, it's going to be re-registration. So right at the top where it says to choose 1A or 1B, everyone's going to be choosing 1B. This is my re-registration for TPS. I was previously registered. Moving forward with the I-821, there's some information that they ask here. So they ask for the date of entry in the U.S. and the place of entry into the U.S. Now, many of the applicants will have their prior applications with them. So if they have their prior I-821 with them, you can just kind of copy over that information. However, if they do not, maybe they will have their passport with the visa that they entered inside that passport, as well as the I-94, which is the entry card. It used to be a white postcard within the passport. So they might have the visa or the visa and the I-94 available in their passport. So you can get that information directly by looking at the visa or the I-94. And we're going to look at examples of examples of visas and I-94s in the upcoming slides. But there's a lot of information in the passport is the point. So if they don't have their prior I-821, ask them if they have their passport. Look through to see if there's an entry by visa or, an entry stamp on their passport, and you'll be able to get the information here about date of entry into the U.S., place of entry, manner of arrival, meaning did they come on a visitor visa, did they come on a student visa, how did they come. If their I-94 is there, there's a number right at the top of the I-94. You would put that in there. And the date their authorized stay expires. That is indicated on the I-94, and we'll look at an example in a minute. The date the authorized stay expires will not come from the visa itself, but will be on the I-94. So, again, they're asking, are you also filing a request for an employment authorization document? They have to just write yes or no. Again, regardless of whether they're requesting an EAD or not, they're still going to do the separate form, the I-765, because everyone must complete an I-765, even if they don't want a work permit or their application will be rejected. So most people do want it, so for the most part, you'll be answering yes, I'm requesting a work authorization. So to give you some visual to see what these visas look like, we have a couple of different samples of visas and where information can be found on the visa. So here is a typical example of a typical visitor visa, the B1, B2, which is called a visitor or the tourist visa. You can see by the red circle where it says visa type / class, and it says B1, B2. That's the information that they're asking for on the previous slide where it says type of admission. However, as I said earlier, the expiration date on the visa is not the controlling date as to when the authorized stay expires. For the date the authorized stay expires, you'd have to look at the I-94, which we'll look at in a minute. So even though, for example, the visa here is valid for 10 years from 1995 to 2005, that doesn't mean the authorized stay was all the way to 2005. You still have to look at the I-94 for the controlling date on that. This is just another example of a more recent visa, the ones that are issued now. And again, this is a B1, B2 visa, as you can see circled by the red circle where it says visa type and class. So here's an example of an I-94. It's the I-94 arrival and departure record. And there's a lot of information on here. So the number across the top, the 6266 number, that's the I-94 number. So on the form we looked at a few slides ago on the I-821, when they ask for the I-94 number, that's the one that they're looking for. Also, you can tell a lot of information here from the stamp. The stamp says admitted ATL, so ATL would be Atlanta. For JFK, it usually says NYC. It might say MIA for Miami. So there's information on the place of admission here, which is also requested on the 821. The date of admission would be June 25th, 2006. That's the stamped date. In this case, the type of admission is an L1 visa. And the day the authorized stay ends is April 23rd, 2009. So it's the handwritten date below the stamp. Okay? So a lot of valuable information on the I-94 that then you'll put into the forms themselves. So on the I-821, the application for TPS, they're going to ask for manner of entry. If you entered on a visa, it would likely be the type of visa you entered on. For the most part, it would be a visitor visa. That's the most typical. However, there are many, many different types of visas, so it would be important to look at the visa itself. Some people will enter on false documents. For example, maybe the documents of another Haitian national who had a visa, or even some other type of passport. So in that situation, we would write false documents in that section. And if someone entered without any permission, immigration refers to that as entry without inspection, EWI, so we would write EWI there. As for the date of entry, again, that's normally going to be on the I-94 for someone who entered with a visa. If they have lost their I-94 or they entered without any inspection, we'd be able to estimate that date as to when they entered. But again, since we're dealing with re-registration here, it's important to be consistent with any prior I-821 that was filed. So hopefully the applicants, if they don't have their actual I-94 or their passport, they might have their prior I-821, and we can copy that information from there for consistency. On the I-821, they asked for the A number. We looked earlier at where that can be found. So typically that's going to be on the prior work permit. It's also on any receipts that were previously issued by USCIS. So since we're dealing with re-registration, there should be lots of previous receipts that someone might have with them. On the current EAD, it's also called the USCIS number, but that's the same thing as A number, not to confuse anyone. Where it asks for the USCIS online account number, the LS number, that's going to be blank for everyone that we're dealing with for TPS. Doesn't really apply in this situation. And then almost everyone will have a U.S. Social Security number now because, again, since we're dealing with re-registration, these are individuals who've had a work permit for some time, and typically they would have gone to Social Security and they would have a Social Security number. On the I-821, they also ask for the date of last entry into the U.S. Now, the date of last entry could be the same as the date of the initial entry if they've never left. However, if someone with TPS has the opportunity to sometimes travel, as long as they get something called advanced parole. So since the individuals will be assisting have had TPS for a while, they could have traveled on advanced parole. So when they ask for date of last entry, if the applicant did travel on advanced parole, you would put that more recent entry on here. And the status, if they did travel on advanced parole, would be advanced parole TPS. And then when they ask for port of entry, that would be where they entered upon their return with advanced parole. And also on the I-821, they ask for current immigration status. All of these applicants' current status will be TPS, again, because we're re-registering. And then they ask, are you now or have you ever been in immigration proceedings? Some people will know that right away and be able to provide you information. They may have some documents from the court. However, applicants may be a little bit confused about whether they've been in proceedings before. If that's the case, there's an 800 number that we can call. It's an automated system, not an actual person, but a computer automated system where you call the number and then you enter their A number, which we discussed a few minutes ago, into the system, and they will tell you if the person has ever been in immigration court before, and also information about what happened in the court case. So it's on the PowerPoint 1-800-898-7180, and we'll have it available to you if we need to call during the event. On the application, they ask for information about current spouse, also about former spouses and children. The current version of the A-21 actually says that these sections regarding information about spouse, prior spouse, and children only need to be filled up for late initial filers. And since we're mainly going to be dealing with re-registrants, not late initial applicants, there's a chance that we won't even have to fill out these sections. We're still looking to make sure that's correct. But if we do have to fill out these sections, then try to fill them out as much as possible. A spouse is a spouse even if they're separated, unless they're officially divorced, and then they'll be in the former spouse section. When they ask for all children, they mean all children anywhere in the world, not just children in the U.S. And they ask for addresses and information about your children and your spouse. If you don't have all that information, that's fine. You can put it down as unknown, but just fill it out as much as possible. But it does seem that this is a very recent change on the current version of the form, because as you can see on this slide, it says complete this section only if you're filing a late initial application. And since the majority of the people will be assisting are not late initial registrants, but re-registrants, we may be able to actually skip a couple of sections here. So basic eligibility, again, the basis for eligibility is, of course, that they're nationals of Haiti. They have to be nationals of Haiti or they're not eligible, but again, we're dealing with re-registration, so pretty sure we're going to have Haitians coming for assistance. And the date you first entered the U.S., again, on this page, they're asking for the date you first entered the U.S., not your date of last travel. So it's just important that when they're asking for dates, that you just read the question carefully, whether they're asking for your initial date when you first started residing in the U.S., or if they're asking for the last entry, which was on the previous page. On question 1C, they ask, have you ever traveled to or entered another country other than Haiti and the U.S. in this situation? If the applicant has lived in other countries other than Haiti and the U.S., it can create issues with TPS. Now, since we're dealing mainly with re-registrants, this issue may have come up or should have come up previously. And if so, and it's already been dealt with, that's fine. We'll just be answering yes and explaining where they lived, and just explaining what their status was and how long they were in this third country for. But if they've already dealt with that issue on a previous registration, it should be pretty clear and okay. The main thing is they want to know if they have firmly resettled in a third country, since temporary protected status is really supposed to be like a last option for people. And if they have a third-party country where they can go and live legally, USCIS wants to know about that. So if that does come up, just call one of us over and we can talk to the applicant a little bit more about it. The remainder of the I-821 is a series of yes and no questions. The main thing to note is that if there's a yes answer to any of the questions, please flag down one of the immigration specialists that will be at the event, the Legal Aid Society staff, and we'll talk to the applicant more about the yes answer. Okay. It could be something that they've previously answered yes to and they've already explained on a previous application. If that's the case, that should be fine. But we just want to delve a little bit deeper when we get a yes answer. And then we just wanted to highlight a couple of the yes and no questions that we get the most questions about. There's lots of yes and no questions, but these are the ones that people tend to have questions about. So question 24 asks, have you ever entered the U.S. as a stowaway? A lot of Haitians did come by boat, and so there were some questions about whether if you came by boat, whether that necessarily meant you were a stowaway because you came by boat without permission. So no, if you were openly traveling in a boat, not hiding in a container or anything of that nature, but just openly traveling, that is not a stowaway situation, so your answer would be no. And so for most people for this question, it will be no. It's a very infrequent situation where we have to answer yes to the stowaway question. Question 31B says, have you ever served or worked in any prison, jail, prison camp, detention facility, et cetera, et cetera? What they're asking for here is when they say served, they're referring to work. Okay, so they want to know if you've ever worked in any of these locations. They're not asking whether you served time. It's a kind of poorly worded question, but we just want to point out that they're asking if you've ever worked in any of these locations, not whether you've served time in a prison. And again, for most people, this will be no, but, there are some people who did work in a prison or jail. So Part 10 of the I-821 is the preparer section. Only Legal Aid Society staff will be signing as preparers. So if you're helping us or assisting us as a volunteer, you're just going to call one of the Legal Aid staff members over to review the application. And then once we've reviewed it and everything looks good, then we will sign as the preparer. Okay, so unless you're Legal Aid Society staff, you're going to leave this blank and let us sign as preparer after we review the application. Okay, so that's all I have on the I-821. Now we're going to move to the I-765, the application for an EAD, the Employment Authorization Document or Work Permit. As I stated earlier, everyone has to include an I-765 in their packet, even if they are not requesting a work permit. So that's really important to know. If you're applying for the first time for a work permit, you would check the top box, permission to accept work. For the vast majority of applicants, since we're dealing with people who've been registering for a long time, for most people it's going to be renewal. So if they've had a work permit before, you're going to check renewal, which is the third box. This will be the case most of the time. If the applicant does not want a work permit, okay, for whatever reason, You still have to include the I-765 in the packet, but you're going to leave all three of these boxes at the top blank. So you're just not going to check any of them, but then you're going to just proceed to fill out the rest of the application and include it in the packet. Okay? Again, on the I-765, a lot of the information is repeat information from the I-821, so you're just going to be like putting that information over to the I-765. An example is, again, they're asking for the A number, which we looked at is on the prior EAD and any receipt notices. It could also be called the USCIS number. And or they're asking for the I-94 number in this box. So either one. For the most part, since almost everyone is going to have work permits before, the easiest thing is just to put the A number in this box, which is on the previous work permit. On the I-765, they ask if you've ever applied for employment authorization before. For the most part, it's going to be yes, right, for most people. And then they ask what USCIS office processed your previous work permit application. Right on the front of the work permit, there's a receipt number with a 3-digit. The receipt numbers start with 3 letters and then a series of numbers. The 3 letters is the code for CIS as far as where it was processed. So it might be EAC for the Vermont Service Center or LAN for the Nebraska Service Center. So that code as far as where it was processed is right on the face of the previous work permit. It's also on any receipts for the previous I-765. On the I-765, they ask for current immigration status. That's going to be TPS for everyone. They also ask for the eligibility category code for the issuance of the work permit, and the code for TPS Re-Registration is A12. Okay, and then the other questions in this section are left blank. But since everyone's going to be re-registering, we're probably going to even have the A12 like already pre-printed on here, so you won't have to worry about it. But in case it's not, you'll put in A12. There's on the 765 as well, there's a section for the signature of the preparer. Once again, unless you're legal aid society staff, you're going to be leaving this blank. You're going to be calling over one of the legal aid society immigration unit staff to review the application, and then after review, we will sign off as preparer. Okay, so we've looked at the forms. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what else is in the packet and how to assemble the packet. The applicants also must include two passport-sized photos. At the events that we'll be holding, most applicants will come with the photos. We will write their name and their A number on the back of the photos and then put them in a little bag and attach them to the packet. What are the fees? Okay, so if you are 14 or over and you want a work permit, it's $495. If you're 14 or over and do not want a work permit, it's $85. If you're under 14 and you want a work permit, it's $410. And if you're under 14 and do not want a work permit, there is no charge for the application. So fees for initial registration are a little bit different than for re-registration. I don't anticipate that we're going to have many initial registrants, but just in case we do, the fees for initial registration are on this slide. You can see what they are. Again, I don't think this is going to come up too much, but for most people, it's a little bit more expensive for initial registration than it is for re-registration. What if the applicant cannot pay the fee? So if the applicant is unable to pay the fee, they have the option of applying for a fee waiver. If they would like to apply for a fee waiver, that can be done on Form I-912. You can waive the fees for both the I-821 and the I-765 using Form I-912. The easiest and the best way to do so is if the applicant is receiving any sort of means-tested benefit, then you just have to complete Section 3 and Section 4 of Form I-912, and you can basically skip the rest of the form. A means-tested benefit would be something like Medicaid or food stamps, in this case more likely Medicaid, since individuals with TPS would be eligible for Medicaid, so they may be receiving it. When they say proof for Medicaid in particular, they would want a letter stating that you're currently enrolled in Medicaid, not just a copy of the insurance card itself. They usually want more than that. So hopefully individuals will know that if they're seeking a fee waiver to bring that Medicaid confirmation letter with them. If they're basing their fee waiver on income or being below the poverty line. There's different sections of the I-912 that need to be filled out explaining how much they receive and how much their expenses are, which is a little bit more complicated. But we'll see. For the most part, it seems like it would be Medicaid applicants that would be applying for the fee waiver. If you do have to go into your income and you're using the section of the fee waiver that's not based on a means-tested benefit, but rather being under the poverty level, you'll have to list all your dependents. You'll have to list all your income and all of your expenses, and then you also have to provide proof of your income and your expenses. So proof of your income could be pay stubs, it could be an SSI benefit statement, proof of your expenses could be a copy of your lease, rent receipts, bills, etc. And some people, in the case of some people who may live with a family member or a friend, and maybe the bills and the lease and all the expenses are in someone else's name, you can provide supporting affidavits from family members or friends in support of the fee waiver to prove that you're receiving maybe financial support from your family, and also if you need to prove that you've been in the U.S. But for most re-registrants at this point, they don't have to prove that they've been in the U.S. Before the registration deadline anymore because we're talking about re-registration. However, it can be helpful with the fee waiver if you don't have any income, but your only income is provided by a family member who's supporting you. You can put it in a statement from that family member. If your fee waiver gets rejected for any reason, you have the option of resubmitting another fee waiver with better supporting documents or more supporting documents, or you have the option of then just paying the fee just to get it in. So what supporting documents do you need? For renewal applications, you don't need very much, and that's going to be the vast majority of what we're doing at this point. You just need a copy of the front and back of the work permit, a copy of the photo biographic page of the passport, and then we're just going to also make a photocopy of the envelope, and we'll look at that in a minute, okay? When it comes to initial registrants, there's a lot more to prove. You have to put in the passport to show that you're Haitian national. You have to prove that you've been in the U.S. before January 12, 2011 through now, which requires a lot of documentation, of course, to show your physical presence in the U.S. You have to show that you're eligible for late initial registration, which we will go over as needed. And again, you're going to make a copy of the envelope. But I would just focus for your purposes on the renewal information on this slide because that's really what we're going to be dealing with predominantly. So at checkout, we'll be doing a final review of the application, making sure all of the boxes are checked, everything that needs to be done has been filled in. We're going to, advise people that if they do plan on traveling with their TPS, they must get advance parole first. They cannot leave the U.S. without advance parole, and of course they must return to the U.S. before July 22nd, 2019, because that's when TPS is terminating, and they don't want to be outside the U.S. Even if they have advanced parole, they don't want to be outside the U.S. when TPS terminates. The assembly of the packet would be the I-821 on top, followed by the I-765. If the applicant is filing for a fee waiver, you'd put the I-912 there as well. The G1145, again, is optional. It's just like if you want electronic updates, you'd put that in the back, and then whatever supporting documents. For the most part, again, it's just going to be a copy of the front and back of the current EAD, a copy of the biographic page of the passport. After everything is done and the Legal Aid Society staff has signed off as preparer, you're going to basically be making 2 full copies of the whole packet. So the whole packet meaning the forms and all the supporting documents, as well as the manila envelope, which we're going to look at in a minute. So you're going to make 2 full copies of the entire packet. One is for the client so that they have a copy of everything that they're submitting, and then one is for the Legal Aid Society to keep. We also have yellow registration forms, and that's when you first meet the client and you're doing the basic screening. That's going to be on a yellow form. You're going to keep that yellow form at the end. So we're going to help clients, advise that clients send their application certified mail so that they always have proof of tracking, and therefore they'll have proof of receipt by USCIS. So we'll have a sample. We're going to help them assemble the certified mailing slips. So the slip and the the darker green slip and then the lighter green postcard. The postcard is what they'll get back in the mail as their return receipt, and they'll be able to have their tracking information. After we assemble the envelope, as you see on this slide, we'll just make a copy of the front of the envelope so that we have all the tracking information as well at Legal Aid Society if we want to track the packages to make sure that they were received timely. So the I-601 waiver. Some individuals who are applying for TPS will have what immigration calls grounds of inadmissibility. Now, since we're dealing with re-registrants and it's very late in the game as far as re-registering goes, there's been many registrations, those who needed I-601 waivers to be approved for TPS probably have already waived it in a prior registration, and if so, then that stands when it comes to re-registering for TPS. However, you never know. Something new could come up that they didn't have to waive previously, or that for whatever reason they didn't waive previously. If that does come up, of course, flag one of the Legal Aid Society staff over so we can talk about it a little more in depth. If there are people who need I-601 waivers, that's not something we'd be able to do on the spot at a group event, but one of us will take down their information and give them an appointment to see them at the office on a later date so we can, prepare that more thoroughly. But just as a guide, some of the grounds of inadmissibility would be entering on a false passport or using false documentation, making a false statement on an asylum application or at any other time to an immigration official, entering as a stowaway, having a communicable disease of public health significance, for example, tuberculosis, SARS, and then there are others. This is not an exhaustive list. Again, if it was previously waived, it won't have to be waived again. It won't have to be waived again for TPS, I should say. If there's another form of relief, it might have to be. But if any of these things come up, please speak to one of the Legal Aid Society staff there, and we'll go over this in more detail. Okay, we've reached the end of our presentation. Again, I want to thank you all for listening to this presentation, and thank you even more for agreeing to help volunteer at one of our Haitian TPS re-registration events that are upcoming. We really appreciate your help, and thank you all for listening. Bye-bye.